stuck in the bed. Stuck in the bed. Stuck in the bed.
Okay, welcome everybody to podcast Who Knows. This is Stuck in the Mail with Mike and Casey, and we're looking at the 1992 Mike Patton opus, critically acclaimed commercial failure, oddly named, difficult to display, Angel Dust by Faith No More, of course. Faith No More, of course, being Mike Patton's most commercially viable vessel. And then Mike Patton being someone that can be talked about at great lengths, and his fans are affectionately known as the Patton Heads. I don't know if that's a Jimmy Buffett ripoff or something, but I'll start with what Wikipedia says here. So Angel Dust was met with extensive critical acclaim. One critic wrote that the album is one of the more complex and simply confounding records ever released by a major label. And similarly, another called it the most uncommercial follow-up to a hit record ever. That's, of course, referring to The Real Thing with Epic, which sold 2.5 million in the latter end of 89, 90, essentially kicking off the 90s. After hearing the album, the band's label warned that releasing the album would be commercial suicide. Okay, that's enough of that. So I don't know if we're going to start with the long-haired, not tied back singer in the room argument. Red Hot Chili Peppers versus Faith No More. This is one of the most infamous things about talking about this album or The Real Thing.
Yes.
Or Red Hot Chili Peppers.
So
What's your take? Your take first, Mike.
Well,
what have you learned?
I think maybe it's helpful to kind of jump back and say, like, to the casual observer, because I would consider myself a casual observer before we jumped into this album. I knew one or two songs by Faith No More. Most people probably know the song Epic. Like, that's the image I have of them. That video is so iconic.
Video, yes.
But one thing that we did touch on, to your point, in talking about Red Hot Chili Peppers, was that Anthony Kiedis and Mike Patton have a notorious feud that apparently has been going on for decades. But the timing is interesting because who was first with the whole stomping around rap rock kind of thing? That's the question.
You mean funk metal and or alternative metal? God, I kicked this off last time as saying this was a proto nu metal album, and man, I even hated saying that because obviously we grew up in a time of nu metal, and we grew up before nu metal, and it's a disturbing term, but it falls into that as well. I went down a rabbit hole this morning, was trying to get my facts straight. The fact remains is that the Chili Peppers album that came out before The Real Thing, which is not the album we're talking about, The Real Thing had Epic, their big hit. The only Chili Peppers album before that, well, that had success was Mother's Milk, and that did come out before in 89, and that was number 52, peaked. It was a gold album on the billboards. So not a commercial success, but it did usher in with the Chili Peppers. We know it's the first one with Frusciante. He was listed as saying he hated the producer, which is ironic because it's his first album. He hated the guitar sound. He hated the funk metal sound that they gave his guitar, which, think back to 89, like Guns N' Roses is Kings, right? So and of course, Faith No More would notoriously go on tour with Metallica and Guns N' Roses. But so this producer was probably going on what he thought would sell, He's like, it's got to have this crunchy metal sound. And of course, Frusciante, when he got his sound in Blood Sugar Sex Magik, and they stopped falling back so hard on that rhythmic sound of Flea and the drummer, that's when they got their sound. But that wouldn't come till 91. So when Faith No More with Patton, now there is an album without Patton, and I would make a strong argument that what Patton is doing on Epic in the video, besides looking incredibly 90s and kicking off the 90s look, is that he's trying to look like Chuck Mosley, the original singer of Faith No More. And if you watch the video, their first video, We Care a Lot, they look the same
Oh,
as far
interesting.
as the dress and stuff. Now, Chuck Mosley, I don't know much of the backstory on him. He died like 7 years ago or so. Really cool frontman. But yeah, I think if anything, Mike Patton's just trying to fit into this bigger band from Eureka, by the way. Not all, every member, but Patton is from Eureka, and Mr. Bungle was a true blue Eureka band. That was his band he was in before Faith No More, and we don't want to go down that rabbit hole because it's about 50 bands. But yeah, I mean, the comparison of Kiedis, it falls a little flat because if you have Kiedis saying, "Here's this guy coming out ripping me off," and then it's incredibly more successful. Little slip of the tongue there for an edit. It might be more sexual too, but I think it's more successful. I know that 2.5 million. So, I mean, it reeks of jealousy, does it not?
I
That's all
think
I see.
so.
Jealousy.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like I can understand from Kiedis's point of view. Here's this guy stomping around on stage. They're playing like this,
Yeah,
sort of aggressive speed metal kind of thing we're doing.
it's
Like
more genre. Yeah.
they must have been aware of each other, obviously, before this and kind of competitive anyway. And then when he saw the epic video, he must have been like, this guy's copying me. Meanwhile, I'm guessing Patton is like, well, you guys are copying us and we're better.
Right, exactly. I mean, Patton's voice and Kiedis, they have nothing to do with each other. I mean, rhythmically, yes, there is that funk metal sound there, but I watched the video for Higher Ground this morning. Yes, Kiedis swirls his hair around. The video is amateur, but then when you watch Epic, I think probably a multi-million-dollar video.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's very high-end production. Patton is very reluctant about fronting and being like anyone. He's wearing a Mr. Bungle shirt for his like essentially high school band with terrible song titles. It's like if you had become a success, Mike, in Puget Sound, and you're wearing a Hideous Kid shirt, and I was watching you on MTV, and I was like, "Yeah, go Mike!" Like it's illogical. The whole feud is illogical because, of course, to take it further, apparently. And this is what you would do if you were Mike Patton. After finding out that Kiedis thinks that he ripped him off, he starts actually ripping him off.
Yeah.
He performs as the Red Hot Chili Peppers and he mocks them. So, that's the kind of thing I think you would do if you thought an argument like that was so stupid. Like if like, Ariana Grande or Justin Bieber or someone was actually ripping someone off, they wouldn't go ahead and then take it a step further and show that, how ridiculous that is by mocking them. Certainly not publicly on TV or at a concert, I mean, but
Yeah. I
to
mean,
take it even further from that, yep.
go ahead.
We're going to be stuck on this whole episode. No, I want to hear your thoughts. I'm trying to hold back.
Yeah, no, this is good. I think that the lead up to this album, the lead up to Angel Dust is kind of fascinating because there's this band that blew up right at the cusp of when music was changing and becoming
Yeah.
alternative boom of the 90s. And I've uncovered some interesting insights from researching this band as well. Did you know that so the previous guy, you said his name, previous lead singer,
Chuck Mosley.
Chuck Mosley. So he left, and apparently they auditioned lots of people to be their lead
Oh,
singer,
yes. Are you going to drop the Courtney Love bomb?
including Courtney Love and Chris Cornell.
Yeah. Everyone. So these guys are all trying to get hit with funk metal before grunge too. So,
Mhm. But you
of
look at
course, Soundgarden's the like.
Patton, and I mean, he always had charisma to me, even as a casual observer. But the more you actually listen to the music, you realize how theatrical he is, all the things he
Yeah.
can do with his character voices, his, the
Yeah.
consonants just like cutting through, that's unique to him.
Yeah.
And I mean, you listen to Midlife Crisis and he's just enunciating like this,
Yeah. Yes.
but
He has a 6 octave range. Yeah.
yep. And I find it really interesting too that apparently the real thing, the album, was essentially had been created by the band, and then Patton just kind of stepped in at the last second and became their frontman. Whereas Angel Dust was the first fully realized, kind of the first and only fully realized album by all the members of the original band
Yep.
and Patton,
Right.
which is why it's considered a, critical peak of all of their powers.
Right, exactly. And I read the little blurb there, which from Wikipedia describes it so much. And this, of course, would have been after Blood, Sugar, Sex, Magic. And of course, now Chili Peppers, not to bring up the feud again, they're having their success. Little do they know grunge is going to come along. They have their success. They've actually toned down that sound that they claimed was being ripped off. They changed their sound. They rented the room, the Funky Monks, and they made it more rhythmic, and Flea toned down his playing. They made it less funk. And then Faith No More, I'm sure, doesn't care at all what Red Hot Chili Peppers is doing and makes their album, as you said, Angel Dust, which is what we're supposed to be talking about today. And it is, if you look anywhere or you talk to any Mike Patton, Patton head, Faith No More fan, they will tell you that this is the album, not the real thing. The
Mhm.
real thing is apparently not the real thing. It's Angel Dust, which has this image. I've always known about it, like even in the late 90s or whatever. And you see it and you're like, what? Angel Dust. And I gotta read the quote, I think, from the band about why they named it Angel Dust, because you got to keep in mind this is during the 90s. So this is from, I believe, the guitarist. His name's Randy Bottom. It says, stated they chose the name because it summed up what they did perfectly. And that's a really beautiful name for a really hideous drug. And that should make people think. That's kind of the album. I mean, the only real drug reference on this album is caffeine, which apparently Mike Patton is addicted to. But
Uh-huh.
um, yeah, I mean, it is one of those beautiful but really kind of borderline psychotic listens. It's unlike anything else, and it really no one really bought this album at the time. You got to think like everyone was buying Nirvana, everyone was buying Nevermind, and
Sure.
this is one of those last great pieces of the end of the I hesitate to say hair metal era, but this was a extension of that. It's what would become, as you already stated, it was what would become alternative rock, and it
Yeah.
completely stands out as a milestone.
Yeah, it's very theatrical, very polished. At the time, Nirvana was kind of had this sort of DIY
Yeah,
aesthetic. I mean, coming into Nevermind, like the stuff prior to that, like Nirvana was seen as this sort of underground band that became big, but you know, a grandiose album like The Real Thing kind of stood out in 92.
yeah. No, no, Real Things 89.
I'm
That's
sorry,
the
I said the wrong thing. Angel Dust in 92.
yeah. Yes,
Thank
yes.
you for that.
Yeah. It's what
But
I thought I
yeah,
was thinking.
there's such a variety of styles on this. There's so many layers to the sound. One thing that I kept noticing throughout is it sounds a lot like an Alice in Chains and other things that were happening at the time, but
Sure.
with the addition of this orchestration, like these synth parts, the piano, just the kind of avant-garde song structures, they're so complex. So while it does sound a little bit like it's kind of stuck in 92 in some ways to me, just because of that whole Alice in Chains sound,
Mhm.
not all of the songs have that. There's a tremendous variety.
Yeah, there's I don't want to go through every song, obviously. I'd like to put up my highlights, but I think it would be fun to start with the first one, Land of Sunshine, because it is really interesting, and I doubt if you know this. It's kind of this is a deep cut inside joke, but it's kind of a roll of labels. So Land of Sunshine is Mike Patton, and he's reading fortune cookie fortunes and Scientology mail order quotes.
Okay.
That's there's all those quirky parts where it's like, here's how to order, and there's all that funny, ridiculous stuff. He's reading. Those are probably mostly Scientology, obviously, but I mean that's the start of the album. He's just not even writing lyrics. He's just reading crazy stuff. So that's a good start,
That
right?
makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Tell me
Yeah.
about, so caffeine was pretty intense. That's a, from best I can tell, it's mostly in 3/4, which you're not going to find a lot of metal songs in 3/4.
I don't have notes on the time signatures, but I'm sure you're right. Yeah, all I have for caffeine that I can recall is super riffy. There's a lot of great vocals. Start of like some really guttural vocals, which of course is a patent thing. You
Yep.
know, the voices. Like, I don't know why he never did voices for, say, I don't know what's a popular cartoon. All I can think of is like Ren and Stimpy or something, but
Oh
he
yeah.
has such a voice range. He has
Absolutely.
he has done some voices, like he was on Metalocalypse, which makes sense. You probably never saw that. It's really funny metal spoof cartoon. Let's go to the, I believe, so there was actually somehow four singles on this, although the fourth one is technically a B-side. But the first one is Midlife Crisis, which is
Oh,
the,
good.
and that's the one that most people know. That's the most Spotify listens or whatever they call them on Spotify.
So, Midlife Crisis, this is hilarious to me. I don't know why, but this song was in heavy rotation on our little hometown radio station, K-Wine. I mean, I heard it all the time because I listened to K-Wine because it's all we had. It was literally
Really?
just top 40 radio in there with Celine Dion and whatever else.
Huh.
And they played the heck out of that song. I'm like, how? I don't know if it's because we were, so close to Eureka and they thought that this was
Yeah,
like a local band or whatever.
it's
But
got it's gotta be. It has
But
to be.
yeah, that song, I mean, we talked about the consonants, and him just like spitting out the words. I mean, it is,
Electronics in that sound are really crazy. Like it's got some like borderline what would become late 90s EDM kind of moves, techno moves in it. I can't replicate them in the moment. I'm not hearing this song in my brain, but it has tons of little samples of weird things, you know.
are we going to talk about the menstruating heart lyric?
I don't know. I don't think we have to.
Cool, let's skip that. Oh, did
Hey,
you know
four,
this is pretty
four.
interesting? There are a lot of samples on this record. And did you see that Cecilia by Simon, Paul Simon and Garfunkel, that one is sampled in this beat for Midlife Crisis?
I had no idea. Definitely believe it. That's amazing.
There's
Mike
that
Patton.
weird bridge in the song too with the whip, that's
Yeah,
apparently stolen from the Beastie Boys, which
yeah.
Paul's Boutique had come out like a couple years before. So strange.
Yeah, that's what I was referring. Some of what I was referring to as weird electronics. But okay, yeah, you're the hip hop guy now. Samples, yeah, that's it. Because some of the kids are doing.
Well,
So
apparently they used a ton of samples on this, most of which are buried in the mix. But it was that era where no one knew about getting permission, no one cared.
yeah, yeah, exactly. The technology was so bad. If you managed to pull it off, no one was going to pick up on it, and the record labels certainly were none the wiser.
Hmm.
Um, but so the fourth track. So I actually have two favorite tracks on this. The next one, RV, which is the fourth track, I believe is possibly my favorite song on this. It might be Kindergarten. Both are amazing. Um, RV kind of reminds me of the Dead Milkmen song Stewart, where it's the character of the song is essentially, I don't want to be too cruel here, but I'm going to just go with trailer trash person and their conspiracy theories. Stewart is more so, but RV is just it's such a the thing about Mike Patton that people that love him know is that he's got the metal sound, he's got the clean sound, he's got a million sounds. But what I really like is when he does like his really multi-note crooner chorus, catchy as all hell, and you just can't escape it. You're like, wow, this guy can really sing, and he can really sing. I mean,
Hmm.
he is doing opera by the aughts, and then he once Faith No More ended, he was doing everything with every band and hip hop into everything. I'm jumping way ahead here, but the breadth of this album shows the breadth of what would be this man's work.
Yeah.
And you couldn't tie him down to a band or anything. I made a list here at the end, and it would be completely ridiculous to read off the names of all his bands.
He did have a lot, that is for sure.
A lot, and that's why I think maybe someone like you, someone like me as well. I've always kept Patton a little bit out of my musical liking. There are things that he does and albums that he's been in and bands that he's been in that I really love. This
Yeah.
is one of them, and it's just a great listen thoroughly. Um, I mean, we'll skip to the fourth single. They covered the Commodore's Easy, and it's just a spot on great cover. But then it gets to the part where normally Lionel Richie goes a really high pitched Prince like wheel, and Mike Patton just goes, "Bleh." And it's like, what? You can't
Well,
play that
okay, so I have
radio.
to I have to know, do you think this is a sincere cover? because
Yes.
the blah part made me wonder.
That's just him. I mean, obviously he could have went high. He could have went higher. He could have done a bat sonar. But that's what he wanted to do. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was just in the moment of the song. It's ridiculous.
Well, it was a bold choice because Lionel Richie was not cool in the early
Oh,
90s.
probably not. Probably not.
But he sounds great. And I mean, I couldn't help but think of all the American Idol singers who would do the same thing, shortly thereafter, very badly.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I had that 45 and I own a jukebox. I put it on my jukebox. It's
nice.
a completely ridiculous thing to do, but
Can we talk about my favorite song that I heard on the
yes,
album?
please, please.
My favorite was Everything's Ruined.
Yep.
There are lots of influences on this one. It really sounds a lot like Alice in Chains. I mean, it's kind of there's that flat note. Like, I'm just thinking of this Alice in Chains song where he goes, "Am I wrong?" It's that sort of
Mhm.
like flat note thing that Patton is doing there on this song as well. I love the
Yeah.
piano and the synth in this one. I love how the bass and the kick drum are at the front of the mix. Like you've got the chords going, playing these long chords. Meanwhile, you got the bass and the kick drum just right at the forefront of the mix. And even when you get to the end of the song, the outro sounds like an early 90s kind of hip hop
Yeah.
chorus.
Yeah.
It's just there's so many cool layers, and it just sounds like something that 10 years later became, nu metal, like even like Evanescence. I was listening to this and I'm like, wow, that sounds like Bring Me to Life. Like
Yeah.
all these kind of trends that they started here in 92 that, took 10 years to catch on.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to pick something that springboards off Red Hot Chili Peppers in kind of a comical way, but this album, there's no way that I could make a top 10 90s list and not include this somewhere, you know?
Well, I really appreciated the chance to dig into it because weirdly enough, it was not in the Rolling Stone top
Yeah,
500 albums.
it isn't tons of lists. Like, I mean, it, it got critical acclaim upon release, it did not sell. It did not sell, they did not follow up Epic,
Uh-huh.
they actually faded into obscurity and really kind of, you know, I don't know what kind of band drama they went through, but Mike Patton, like uh, not to return to the Chili Peppers feud again on purpose, but there was a big deal because Mr. Bungle was gone. That's his high school band, and Mr. Bungle, which of course Mike Patton loved, he came back to Mr. Bungle after this album, and later made an album called what was supposed to be Californication. And what happens? The Red Hot Chili Peppers released Californication, and then the record label, Mr. Bungle's record label, had to change it. It came a month after, and they had to change it to California. So I guess the Chili Peppers won there.
Do
And
you
that is
think
a fantastic album if you get the chance.
okay.
The
Do
Bungle
you
one,
do you think
California.
that there's a bit of a like NorCal, SoCal kind of feud element to this? Like I was thinking about how much they hate Guns N' Roses, and I'm like, I
Yeah.
wonder if that's part of it, if it's this whole Eureka, remote outpost in Northern California versus like the whole LA scene. Is that part of it?
Well, whether it is or not, I mean, obviously you've spent a little time in Southern California vacationing or whatever. There's a very different temperament, and I lived in the greater SoCal region. I hesitate to use the word greater. Um, there's a different mindset.
Yeah.
And if you're from Eureka, like I said, it is completely isolated. So yeah, I mean it's super valid. And who knows? The rumor was that the Californications thing was a coincidence,
hmm
but I don't know if that's possible. But I've
this
never
sort of
gotten into Bungle, but if you get a chance, I think it's 1999. Check out California. It is a lot like Angel Dust. It's not as crazy as you might think. There are a couple tracks that Mike Patton's vocals do go completely off the rails. They're towards the end. I actually like them. They're hysterical. I don't know what to even say. I can't remember the names, but they're the kookiest songs. Mr. Bungle is like Faith No More, only, way more tongue in cheek. So,
okay. Well, this has been good. I appreciate the chance to kind of get into a band that was always a little out of my reach and to kind of dig in.
Yeah, and if you go down the rabbit hole, then you can also enjoy Faith No More, Mr. Bungle, Fantomas with the Melvins, Tomahawk with Slayer, Peeping Tom, which is hip hop, Lovage, which is also hip hop with Dan the Automator, Dead Cross, Neverman, Secret Chiefs 3, Naked City, Kata slash Patton, Painkiller, Crudo, The Tango Saloon, Hemophiliac, and more. And he's always performing with this famous violinist, and he's always performing with the avant-garde saxophone player John Zorn.
Quite a list. Quite
There's
a
more.
prolific
That's
man.
the shortened. That's the shortened version. I just wrote etc.
Well, he's
Uh,
someone who probably the fact that he's so opinionated is what kept him from like truly breaking through to being like a household name. But his talent
yes.
is there, and certainly it shines through on this album.
Yeah. I actually just turned my notes, which is my notes on the band, because I was looking at the album notes. So I actually have a few more like things that would be at the beginning of this where we talk about the beginnings. But I think we covered most everything. I think it would be really uh, remiss. Yeah, that's the word. Remiss to not point out the fact that early on, before Mr. Bungle, when they were throwing around names, their original name for a band they were in Eureka was a death metal group called Turd.
Turd.
Yes, and they were also straight edge.
I saw that.
It's very important. I didn't want to know. And then, and one thing I found fun, I think, in a Wikipedia was that, and I think it sums up Mike Patton. Uh, he apparently his dad had records. He was a PE teacher. Apparently, Patton was very athletic in high school,
Yeah,
which seems strange. And then he became an outcast, which makes sense. But apparently, according to Patton, he was very influenced by his dad's records, which specifically Earth, Wind, and Fire and Frank Zappa, which makes perfectly good sense,
yeah,
honestly, right?
yeah. I'm not
Right,
sure that
Mike,
I would, if I ever hung out with him, I'm not sure I would like him very much, but I certainly respect the man. You got to
he
respect.
has a big ego, and he's a he's earned the right to stand on the stage with anyone, and he's earned the right to be his own musician, and he's done it his way, completely,
Of
not to.
course. Well, and I think that there's room enough in the world for both Blood Sugar Sex Magic and Angel Dust.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, what a combo.
Well, is it time to jump into the next one?
I think
Time for the
so.
preview. Okay, so we were joking offline about whether or not you're going to have this album because you have everything,
Okay,
but
maybe I can run and get it.
this is going to be completely out of left field. I'm gonna be shocked if you have it, but I don't know what possessed me to get into this album recently, but I absolutely love it, and it is from a art, music, and fashion icon. That's my first clue.
Art, music, and fashion icon.
This is from the early 80s.
Okay,
This
that's
is a
helping.
little bit of disco meets reggae meets new wave. Um, this is one that is going to take us down to the Bahamas to the famed Compass Point Studios. And I do not own this album, nor can I even show you the Spotify preview of the album cover because it's like a placeholder because there's some rights dispute over this iconic image on the album cover. Everything about this album is iconic. And do you have any
Wow.
idea what I'm talking about?
Grace Jones? Grace Jones?
Night
Yeah,
Clubbing.
night clubbing. I have it.
Do you,
I have I got it. I got it.
do you know
Yeah.
this album?
Yes, I have it. Yes.
It's great.
It
I
is. I think it's their best album too.
it
That's
I
a
don't
great
know
pick.
I don't know what possessed me to get into her, although I do love reggae and I maybe that's how I
Yeah.
did, but um
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
great. I think it's going to be a fun one to dig into. Oh, interesting Dylan connections too.
Yeah. Right. What's funny is the first thing also when we first did this, when you said art and you said new wave, I was going to say Grace Jones, but I
Cool.
held back.
Yeah.
That was my number one thought in my head. I don't know the Dylan connection, but she did mob around with a lot of famous people. She's in this movie I love by Alex Cox, the guy that did Repo Man. She's
Mm.
in a movie called Straight to Hell, and she's with Dennis Hopper in that movie, which
Well,
is crazy.
I remember watching MTV at your house and seeing a Grace Jones video and being terrified.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She's great. I
But
have
enough about that. We'll get into it.
yeah, I have several of her albums, but I think I only have one copy of that, and I think I haven't listened to it in a while, but it's definitely the one that is the best one.
Yeah,
Um,
it's brilliant. So
yeah,
we'll get into
cool,
that next.
cool. I'm on board. I'm a fan.
Cool, man. Well, I
Yeah,
enjoyed it,
I
Casey.
like this pick. I like this pick a lot.
Cool, cool.
Awesome, sweet,
Yeah.
Mike. Talk to you
All right.
soon.